long before the sails of European empires rose against the horizon, long before maps carved continents into pieces for the ambitions of kings, there existed in the farthest reaches of the north a people whose lives were not governed by conquest, dominion, or wealth, but by communion, equilibrium, and a reverent intimacy with the rhythms of ice, wind, and flesh. In this place where the land seemed suspended between realms, where the aurora borealis painted the sky with ancestral light, and the boundary between the corporeal and the spiritual was gossamer thin, the Inuit cultivated a civilization as intricate, resilient, and sophisticated as any to emerge in more temperate climes. It was within this landscape of snow, bone, and story that Inanna was born around the year 1450 on the northeastern edge of what would later be called Baffin Island, into a nomadic lineage that had survived the unforgiving polar expanse for countless generations. Her first breath was drawn not in silence, but in the chorus of wind moaning through drifted snow, in the throb of the sea ice beneath the cormat, a semi-subterranean winter dwelling sculpted from earth, stone, and packed snow, where she emerged from her mother's body under the watchful eyes of women whose hands bore the wisdom of 100 births, swaddled in caribou hides, suckled by a mother who wore her close within the warmth of an amauti, and serenaded by a grandmother whose chants invoked Sedna, the sea goddess of Inuit cosmology. Inanna's consciousness was shaped from infancy by a world in which the animate and the inanimate were inseparable, where animals were kinsfolk and every act carried metaphysical consequence. From early childhood, Inanna's days unfolded according to the cyclical harmonics of the Arctic year, each season orchestrated by nature's tempo, each gesture steeped in ancestral echoes. Her world pulsed with interdependence, where survival demanded not merely adaptation, but intimate attunement to the land's sentient logic. During the long, dappled days of summer, she followed her elders to the coasts, where seal hunts unfolded in choreographed unity, each hunter reading the terrain as a text written in frost and shadow. She observed the elders pay homage to each animal taken, sprinkling fresh snow on spilled blood, whispering thanks to the soul of the seal. And from these acts, she imbibed an ethic of reverent reciprocity, where death was not cruelty, but continuity. As the land turned inward toward the solitude of winter, Inanna's family retreated into communal dwellings of snow and stone, where night reigned for months and stories replaced the sun as illumination. Here, wrapped in the warmth of shared breath and the amber glow of the Kotlik lamp, she was baptized into the mythic architecture of her people. Every tale carried ontological weight, songs that held maps, chants that summoned protection, riddles that disguised profound truths in simplicity. She learned that language was more than a tool. It was a binding force, a sacred covenant with memory, a vessel through which identity was transmitted and preserved. With adolescence came initiation into deeper responsibilities and skills. Inanna's fingers, already deft from play, learned the sacred art of stitching sinew and hide, transforming raw materials into garments that were both functional and ceremonial. She studied the alignments of stars, not for abstract knowledge, but to guide migrations and predict the behavior of animals whose cycles mirrored the constellations. Under the tutelage of women who bore the wisdom of generations, she learned to interpret snowdrifts, to measure wind by its voice, to discern the health of a caribou by a print of its hooves. Her education was total, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and each lesson woven into the fabric of daily existence. marriage came not as disruption, but as expansion. Her partnership with Sukak was forged not in romantic idealism, but in the tempered fire of shared endeavor. Together, they constructed homes from snow blocks cut in silence, reading one another's movements like verses of a song. He hunted with an intuition honed by years of communion with the ice. She prepared the meat with prayers and precision, ensuring nothing was wasted, that the soul of the animal would return without resentment. Their union birthed not only children, but continuity. Ananna taught her sons to respect the land and read its moods. She passed to her daughters the art of transforming seal intestines into translucent parkas that shimmered like ice in moonlight. She spoke to them not as children, but as inheritors of legacy, keepers of the great story. In her middle years, Ananna undertook journeys across territories mapped not by borders but by memory, traveling with trade parties to distant camps where dialect shifted like wind patterns, and every exchange was a reaffirmation of kinship. She participated in rituals that bound clans together, naming ceremonies where infants were given the soul names of ancestors, drum dances that echoed with the pulse of the cosmos, and grieving songs that guided the dead into the afterlife. These ceremonies were not separate from daily life. They were its essence, enacting a worldview where the sacred shimmered through the mundane. In moments of illness or uncertainty, Ananna consulted the Angakuk, who entered trance states to seek counsel from spirit guides or the souls of animals. She respected the Angahuk not as a magician, but as an emissary between worlds, essential to maintaining the equilibrium upon which all life depended. The spiritual dimension of her culture was not an abstraction, but a lived reality, its truths encoded in the ice itself. As she aged into the role of matriarch, Ananna became a reservoir of wisdom. Younger generations sat at her feet to hear her recall great hunts and strange dreams, to learn the right sequence of words to calm a storm or heal a wound. She remembered not only facts but patterns, how the snow changed taste before a thaw, how the aurora flickered differently when the ancestors were near. Her memory held a library of techniques, rituals, and cautions that no written text could contain. She became part of the land's grammar, her voice indistinguishable from the wind's lullaby. When colonial shadows began to stir far to the south, Ananna sensed a change not yet visible. Birds flew erratically, weather patterns faltered, dreams grew more insistent, filled with omens and unnamed dread. She did not live to see the ships arrive, but her stories warned of forgetting, of losing the thread that binds people to place, soul to body, past to present. In death, Ananna was not mourned as lost, but welcomed as returned. Her body, placed beneath stones and sky, began its slow return to the elements. Her name was given to a newborn child, whose first cry echoed the same sacred breath with which Ananna had entered the world. In this cyclical continuity, the Inuit sustained a lineage deeper than blood, richer than conquest, a civilization written not in ink, but in the memory of ice, bone, and breath. In the years that followed Ananna's return to the spirit world, her legacy reverberated like the distant thunder of cracking sea ice, each echo stitched into the evolving consciousness of her descendants, her name reborn in the cries of a new generation who walked the same trails but under a sky subtly altered by the first signs of intrusion. The child who bore her name, Ananya II, was born not in ignorance of the past, but steeped in it, swaddled in tradition, language, and belief, yet awakening into a world whose balance was increasingly delicate. By the late 15th century, whispers of foreign presences reached the fringes of Inuit territory. Tales passed between trading partners from the Labrador coast, carried on driftwood and shaped in the wary inflections of the Old Ones. Inanna II, much like her namesake, was a child of immense curiosity and spiritual sensitivity, whose life would unfold not only along the established rhythms of the tundra, but also within the subtle, growing tensions of a world on the cusp of irrevocable change. Her birth, like her grandmother's, was witnessed in the sacred embrace of community. She entered the world under the rhythmic chant of birth songs, her umbilical cord severed with a blade of flint passed down through 6 generations, and her first bath conducted in meltwater gathered from a sacred glacier whose slow drip was believed to carry ancestral dreams. Her earliest memories were of the scent of burning moss, the pulse of the drum, the distant howls of sled dogs that sang to the moon, and the soft hush of her great-aunt's voice, whispering the story of the sea woman Sedna, whose fingers had become all marine life. As she grew, Inanna II was taught by her elders to read the land as a palimpsest, a layered archive of knowledge and presence where every stone bore witness, every animal track a narrative, every cloud an omen. She learned to walk barefoot across the tundra in the summer to feel the temperature of the permafrost beneath her feet, and was taught to speak to the winds with respect, for they carried the voices of those who had gone before. Her linguistic inheritance was immense. Her language held over 100 words for snow, each one a descriptor of texture, intent, danger, or blessing. These words were not luxuries, but tools, each vital in decoding a world of nuance. By the time she reached adolescence, Inanna II was already marked by dreams. She saw visions in the smoke of the Kudlik lamp, in the shape of caribou herds, in the flight patterns of birds. These signs did not frighten her family. They were interpreted as the first whispers of shamanic calling. Unlike her grandmother, who had walked alongside Angakok but not among them, Inanna II was seen as a potential bridge between worlds. Her dreams grew deeper, more layered. She began to speak in voices not her own, recounting events she could not have witnessed. Her people began to consult her on matters usually reserved for the elders. This spiritual awakening occurred against a backdrop of creeping disruption. Where once migration routes followed ancestral logic, subtle shifts in animal behavior now baffled even the most experienced hunters. The seals came later than expected. The sea ice melted too soon. Inland, the caribou herds thinned. The old songs no longer summoned the same response from the land. These changes were not immediately traced to external forces. There was no direct contact yet with outsiders, but the elders muttered about a dissonance in the balance, a subtle offense in the great harmony. The arrival of a broken kayak, clearly not of Inuit craftsmanship, washed ashore during Inanna II's 13th winter, confirmed the elders' suspicions. It bore symbols they could not read and tools of strange design, but its presence was a clarion warning. The world beyond was moving closer. As an initiate Angakok, Inanna II was tasked with interpreting these omens. Her trance journeys became more frequent, her insights more urgent. She spoke of fire ships on the water, of pale men with metal garments and eyes like storm ice. Her voice changed when she spoke of them, and her body shook as though resisting the vision itself. Her community listened with equal parts awe and fear. Yet even as these visions darkened, Anana II's daily life unfolded within the rich rhythms of her people. She hunted with precision, carved tools with her own patterns, created garments that blended the old motifs with symbols seen in her dreams. She became a teacher, initiating younger children into the language of the stars and the sacred geometries of snowflakes. Her songs carried new cadences, some mournful, some defiant, but all aimed at anchoring her people amid the rising tide of uncertainty. She presided over rites of passage with calm authority, tooth offerings for children's first seals, naming ceremonies that conferred ancestral spirits, and the final rites of those who passed into the spirit world. Each act was both tradition and resistance, a refusal to forget, a ritual of continuity in a changing world. The first physical encounter with foreigners came during Ananya II's 27th year. A small group of pale-skinned men appeared at the edge of the coastal hunting ground, clad in animal skins that hung awkwardly, their movements halting and their eyes wide with both desperation and curiosity. They did not arrive as conquerors, but as lost men, hungry and broken by the Arctic. The community debated whether to help or exile them, but it was Anana II who, through a trance vision, declared that they must be received, not as guests, but as omens. She instructed the hunters to give them food, but no names, fire, but no stories. The strangers received seal meat and dried fish, and they watched with bewilderment as the Inuit moved with fluid grace through a world the foreigners could not decode. These men left after several weeks, taking with them fragments of language, gestures, and perhaps a sense of humility. Anana II warned that they would return, and next time they would not come starving. That prophecy framed the remainder of her life. She dedicated herself to recording knowledge, not in ink or carvings, but in people. She trained several apprentices in the old rituals, urged the women to double their efforts in storytelling, and taught the children not only what to remember, but how to remember. Songs became longer, chants were layered with extra meanings. Stories that had been told in hushed tones were now proclaimed during ceremonies. She recognized that cultural memory was the last and most potent form of defense. Her role grew beyond that of shaman or elder. She became something akin to a living archive, encoding in her speech and actions the essence of a world under threat. In her last years, Ananya II spent long periods in solitude, fasting beneath the northern lights, her body becoming lighter, her gaze increasingly fixed on distances others could not see. Some said she conversed with Sedna herself. Others claimed she had learned to summon the winds. All agreed that when she finally passed, it was not with sorrow, but with purpose. Her death was marked by a silence so deep it rang like a bell. She was laid on the ice wrapped in the skins of all the animals she had honored, her hands folded over a seal oil lamp still warm with flame. Her apprentices took her bones inland to rest beneath an inuksuk built with stones gathered from every direction of the compass. They sang her soul into the aurora, and in the glow, many claimed they saw her dancing. The world would change irrevocably in the years that followed. Ships would arrive, disease would spread, and the old ways would be tested beyond imagination. But the memory of Ananya II stood like a cairn in a storm, not unshaken, but unyielding. Through her and through those she taught, the soul of a civilization persisted, not in monuments, but in memory, not in conquest, but in continuity. Her story, like that of her grandmother, was not a relic of the past, but a beacon, a sacred reminder that even in the coldest places, fire can be carried forward, breath by breath, generation by generation. By the turn of the 16th century, as whispers of strange sails filtered slowly across the north through intertribal word and rumor, the legacy of Ananna the Elder endured not only in memory but in practice, stitched into the sinew-threaded garments of her descendants, reverberating in their dreams, and etched in the subtle notations of their lived environment. Her granddaughter's daughter, named Ananna in her honor, Ananna III, was born into a world on the cusp of tectonic transformation. The year was 1530. While still untouched by direct European presence, the Inuit of the Eastern Arctic were beginning to sense the tremors of an approaching epoch, not in stories of conquest, but in altered animal migrations, changes in wind patterns, and the thinning consistency of sea ice. These signs were not understood as merely natural anomalies, but as cosmological indicators, evidence that the balance between human, animal, and spirit realms was undergoing disruption. And in such times, it was the elders and the visionaries who were tasked with interpreting what lay ahead. Ananna III was born during the season of the returning sun, when the long dark of winter gave way to the first muted golds spilling across the horizon. Her birth, attended by women from neighboring camps, was accompanied by the rhythmic drumming of sealskin tautened over driftwood frames. The drumming was not celebratory alone, it was protective, a vibrational call to ancestral spirits to bless and shield the newborn from unseen forces. Even as an infant, her presence was marked as uncanny. She stared long at the fire, cooed during chanting ceremonies, and once, at the age of 3, correctly identified a hidden fox's den her elders had overlooked. Her mother, Nuna, herself a gifted dream interpreter, took this as confirmation that the spirit of Ananna the Elder had returned not just symbolically, but quite literally, reborn into a time of great consequence. By the age of 6, Ananna III demonstrated a profound sensitivity to both the visible and invisible worlds. She memorized stories after a single hearing, often correcting elders who misremembered a sequence or inflection. She became adept at constructing model Inuksut with a precision that mimicked the elder stones, each rock chosen for balance and meaning. Yet, it was not merely her intellectual prowess that marked her. It was her ability to dwell in silence, to observe without intrusion, and to intuit the needs of others before they spoke. In a society where overstatement was suspect and listening sacred, these were signs of potential leadership. Her people were mobile, yet their movements followed ancient blueprints. They traveled inland for caribou, to the sea for seal, and across the ice floes in search of narwhal. Ananna III walked these paths as her foremothers had, but with a sense of heaviness, of urgency. By the time she turned 12, the animals no longer arrived in the expected order. Some years, the seals were lean, the caribou wandered off routes known for generations. And the pack ice, once stable and thick by midwinter, began to fracture unpredictably. These phenomena were spoken of in hushed tones around the kulik, the oil lamp, signs of a world out of rhythm. The shamans said the spirits of the sea were angry. Elders said too many taboos were being broken, that the younger generations had grown lax in their rituals. But some, including Nuna and the village's oldest Angakuk, whispered a more troubling interpretation. That something beyond their immediate world was intruding, something carried on the air like a foreign breath. Still, Ananna III's coming of age proceeded with the rites expected of her station. At 13, She killed her first ptarmigan with a stone sling, preparing its body with reverence and singing its spirit into the afterlife. At 15, she fasted for 4 days, seeking a vision in a sacred cave marked by ancient ochre symbols. There, she reported seeing a massive bird made of fire and wood, with eyes like polished stones and wings that did not flap. It emitted a roar like falling icebergs and dropped men onto the land. Her elders debated the meaning of this vision for weeks. Some dismissed it as metaphor. Others, particularly the Angakuk, felt a chill settle into their bones. In her 17th year, the vision came true. Word arrived that strangers had been seen on the distant southern shores. Men with hair like sun-bleached driftwood, wrapped in heavy woven cloth, riding great canoes that did not require paddling. These men traded metal tools and beads for furs, but also brought disease and discord. Anana III's group, still far to the north, felt no immediate danger, but the stories planted seeds of fear. The harmony of the land, already trembling, seemed to recoil further. Whale migrations faltered. Strange birds appeared, not migratory, but foreign. The shaman declared the barriers between worlds to be thinning. Faced with this encroaching uncertainty, Anana III began to gather knowledge more aggressively, compiling what could only be called a living archive. She memorized every ancestral tale, every healing chant, every taboo and its origin. She made contact with Inuit groups from distant territories, learning their dialects, their interpretations of change. Her dog sled became a vehicle of oral preservation, and she came to be known across the tundra as one who carried stories, one whose presence turned strangers into kin. In a world with no written text, her mind was a library. She began to train others in this way, recruiting children and adolescents to carry fragments of the knowledge she amassed. Yet, knowledge alone could not stem the tide. When the first traders arrived in her region, tentative, half-starved, seeking furs and friendship, Anana III greeted them not with hostility, but with ritual caution. She insisted on offerings to Sedna, purification by smoke, and the observance of dietary taboos. These men, confused but desperate, agreed, and, for a time, there was uneasy peace. The newcomers brought knives sharper than bone, kettles that held heat longer than stone, and garments woven from sheep's wool, a material alien to the Arctic. Some in her community accepted these gifts too eagerly. Others feared them. Anana III walked the narrow line between openness and protection. Her greatest fear was not death or even cultural erosion. It was spiritual rupture, the severing of the unseen threads that bound humans, animals, and spirits into a delicate lattice of mutual recognition. When one of the young men in her group accepted a musket from the traders and used it to kill a seal without ritual, the ice beneath the camp groaned for days. The Angakuk interpreted this as a cry from Sedna, who now viewed the humans as oath breakers. A great sickness followed, not only physical, though several died of an unknown fever, but existential. The stories told around the Kulik lost their luster. Young ones stopped asking questions. A kind of forgetting began. In her 40th year, Anana III convened a gathering of neighboring camps, a rare and arduous endeavor in the Arctic. They met under the summer sun, when the days stretched like golden thread, and shared songs, visions, and fears. Anana spoke of balance, of the need to absorb without erasure, to adapt without forgetting. She advocated for a new form of cultural stewardship, one in which memory became portable, redundant, shared across minds like a virus of preservation. And so a pact was made. Each camp would designate knowledge bearers, trained from childhood not only in hunting and sowing, but in song cycles, migration stories, and rituals of renewal. Ananna III lived long enough to see the first permanent trading posts established on the fringes of her world. She watched, with sorrow, as some families abandoned the seasonal cycle, settling in wooden huts and trading pelts for flour. But she also witnessed resistance, children who still learned the names of the stars, young women who refused to sew with foreign cloth, boys who asked to be trained in the old drum songs, and in these she saw continuity. When her time came, Ananna III chose to die as her foremothers had. Outside, beneath the open sky, her body offered to the elements and the scavengers, her soul unburdened by walls or foreign rites. Around her, her apprentices sang not a mourning song, but a song of transmission, a confirmation that her words, her visions, her breath would not vanish, but pass on, carried across the snow and through time, into the bodies of those yet to be born. Thus, even as the southern world surged northward, reshaping geography and cosmology alike, Ananna's lineage endured, not as relic, but as resistance, not as nostalgia, but as a living architecture of reverence and survival. In the story of Ananna and her descendants, we find not only the chronicle of a people, but the architecture of a worldview, one shaped not by conquest, but by continuity. Through 3 generations, the lineage of Ananna stood as witness to both the unyielding beauty of the Arctic and the slow, creeping arrival of a different world, one driven by extraction, commodification, and the written word. Yet against this tide, the Inuit memory persisted, encoded in story, sung in lullaby, passed hand to hand like fire cupped in a storm. Ananna III's life marked a threshold, a bridge between epochs. She did not resist change with weapons or walls, but with vigilance, reverence, and the radical act of remembering. In a time when forgetting grew easier with each foreign intrusion, her commitment to teaching, to transmitting the old ways without calcifying them, became an act of quiet defiance. She reminded her people that survival was not merely a matter of the body, but of the spirit, of staying rooted in values that recognized the land as kin and knowledge as shared inheritance. As the Arctic changed, its ice thinning, its seasons shifting, its silence pierced by foreign names, the legacy of Ananna's lineage remained. It was found in a child humming an ancient melody, in the shape of stones set to guide the traveler, in the shared meal harvested with respect and offered with thanks. Civilization, in this context, was not measured by monuments or conquest, but by the fidelity of memory and the ethics of reciprocity. The story of Ananna does not end with her death. It continues in those who still listen to the wind, who still read the stars, who still speak to animals with respect. In them, the world she preserved lives on,